You are listening to Down Home. In this episode, we're diving into a word that carries with it a very heavy meaning: ghetto. In modern times, ghettos are often associated with poverty, crime, and neglect. Areas of cities where municipalities have failed to invest in the people that live there. But where did this negative connotation come from? And how did the idea of the ghetto evolve over time from 16th century Europe, 19th century America, to 1930s Nazi-occupied territories? And how did the concept of ghetto shift into what we recognize today? I'm Derek Wise, and on behalf of Jay Jones, welcome to Down Home, the Canadian experience from two black men.
Breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, simple breaking new ground, breaking new ground.
Yeah, so ghettos, man, what did you find?
Well, in the ghetto, I thought it was interesting that the biggest thing. Anyway, I want to do a little definition of the ghetto first. Ghetto is usually defined as a poor urban area occupied primarily by a minority group or groups. And the word ghetto was first used in Venice in 1516 in Italy, to segregate neighborhoods for the city's Jew population, and who were by law told to reside outside of the city, taking up a few blocks. I thought that was interesting that it goes so far back. And the word ghetto itself, it has two. It has two connotations. A ghetto can also be a positive thing because it brings together community. And the first one is it has negative connotation because it usually means that people are being dehumanized or they're lesser class, So I just those were my jumping points that sort of caught my eye at the beginning.
Yeah, I found similar information as well. The Venetian ghetto.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was interesting. So the actual word ghetto comes from the place where the Jews were segregated to.
Mm-hmm.
It was known as it was an island, actually.
Yeah, I think they based it off of the boundary name or something like that.
Yeah, the place was called New Ghetto.
Yeah.
New Ghetto. But yeah, it was and there wasn't really a negative connotation in the beginning, from what I read.
Mm-hmm.
About the back in that time, like 15, 16.
Yeah.
It was kind of like a good compromise. So you had the Christians that occupied the city.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they were the largest and most powerful group, both socioeconomically and politically.
Mm-hmm.
And to compromise, instead of saying you can't live here, it says, okay, you can live over there.
Yeah. It was sort of the foundation of what a ghetto became, because there were several ghettos all over European cities.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest ghetto, which had a real negative connotation, was because of the Nazi regime. And they really sort of made ghettos to put the Jews in all one place.
Between 1939 and 1945, Nazi Germany established hundreds of ghettos, forcing Jewish communities into overcrowded, walled-off sections of the cities. These ghettos were meant to isolate, starve, and ultimately eliminate entire populations. Warsaw, the largest, held nearly 500,000 people in squalid conditions. Disease and hunger ran rampant. But within these walls, there was also resistance. Secret schools, underground newspapers, and armed uprisings. Like the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising of 1943, the people in these ghettos showed remarkable courage against impossible odds. These ghettos weren't just holding grounds, they were part of a calculated genocide. Most residents were eventually deported to extermination camps, marking yet another step in the Holocaust's grim machinery.
So
Yeah.
when it came time to sort of, you know, put them in, you know, in transit towards the, you know, all the sort of the Holocaust kind of places. That's what it did for them, you know, so they could keep
Yeah.
all the Jews together and easily take them to, you know, I don't know what they were called. What were they called?
The
The
concentration camps.
concentration camps.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, so yeah, like even like before, from what I read before that, like the term ghetto, it kind of started to phase out a little bit because people were being integrated into society. The Jews were
Yeah.
being integrated into society. But then in the New World in New York, it the term got revived again
Hmm.
in New York because, and it wasn't a forced segregation. It was a neighborhood, like the Lower East Side of
Yeah.
Manhattan
Yeah.
was basically resided by the Jewish population, and that's when
Hmm.
the word ghetto was revived in North America
Yeah.
before the Nazis kind of brought that around for their forced segregation. Definitely.
Yeah, yeah, and there was like yeah, because the German and the Irish, like in their great immigration, started to form these enclaves of just sort of their sort of heritage and culture, and
Hmm.
you know, working class citizens trying to you know follow the American dream.
Yeah.
And I had no idea that ghettos were like it started way back then, you know, and then in the and then of course the black you know, African American ghettos, that's also took a turn because of segregation and the civil rights movement. You know, it was really a negative time. Like basically, what surprised me was after sort of people were trying to the blacks were trying to escape slavery, they went north to all these different cities, Chicago, Detroit, you know, LA, because they were cities of industry and people were trying to find good jobs. Like, say, for instance, Detroit was, you know, you had the Ford plants and everything like that. So a lot of people went there. And what happened after World War One was when the vets came back, they started to compete for jobs. And sadly, I know we talk about this a lot, but it really didn't favor the blacks and there was a lot of racial violence. There was one particular time called the in 1919 called the Red Summer, which was a lot of sort of black and white violence against each other, and usually it was just lots of innocent black families lost their homes and their housing.
Yeah, that's that modern like connotation of ghetto
Hmm.
being linked to black people, that was kind of linked to the migration north, and once a lot of black people got jobs in these
Yeah.
factories and whatnot, but then that's where the ugly head of segregation bore its head because a lot of these families weren't allowed to buy homes next to
Hmm.
their coworkers.
Hmm.
So that's
Yeah.
where redlining came in,
Hmm.
which kind of created the modern black ghettos.
Hmm.
But even back then in the 50s and 60s, a lot of the ghettos were affluent,
Hmm. Very
right?
much so.
Like the
Yeah.
40s and 50s, they were actually they were working class families. It was created by class
Yeah.
and race, right?
Hmm.
So these were working class families. They had money. They were affluent. There was a community. Um, our modern like take on the ghetto of poverty, and that was more like the late 60s and 70s, huh?
Hmm. Yeah. Especially during the civil rights movement.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Where a lot of black people were in what amounted to like almost tenement housing,
Yeah.
government housing.
Yeah.
A lot of people that were on the downside of the socioeconomic scale. That's kind of the modern take and negative take on the ghettos in North
Yeah.
America.
Yeah, and when you really think back to it, like segregation, like I was thinking today, like segregation, you know, it was abolished in I guess 1964. That's like 50 years ago. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
the sort of the fallout of that is sort of all this still the negative connotation, like you say, and the class. And I think that lends itself to sort of still creating that divide, not just because of the social economic situations, but just because of the way people are viewed, right? So
Mm,
to me, that's always sort of the underlying thing that causes people to look at each other differently when we're not. You know, that's what makes it sad for me. Like I was like, people are still attached to these things. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. And it it just goes to show you though, like the generational traumas, the generational impact of policies that came before the civil rights movement in the 60s and up here in Canada. The impact and the wave of them they continues today.
yeah, for sure.
There's a lot of people that are weighed down by the impact of what happened back then. They're still in. Well, before we go into that, in Canada, like the term ghetto, like I don't, we know, like doesn't seem to apply in the same standard, right?
No,
Like
I don't
when
think.
you think of like when you're thinking of ghetto, you're thinking about South Central Los Angeles or Harlem back in the 60s kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Like large swaths of areas where there was hard socioeconomic situations, a lot of poverty.
yeah.
Here in Toronto, you got like Regent Park, Jane and Finch, maybe Rexdale kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And because of the system we live in, the socioeconomic situation might be a little bit down, but it's not to the same degree as it is in the States.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And as far as segregation, there's no segregation. It's more like people coming together in community. Like they're, when like especially like in the Rexdale area, when people emigrate, they emigrate to where their families are or they know, right?
Yeah, of course, yeah,
So it creates that community.
yeah,
Same with Regent Park,
yeah.
same
Yeah.
thing, right?
Yeah, a lot of positive things do come from it. Because you can be with your own, the camaraderie, the community, like you say, and people working together to better their lives. And, it's kind of like a situation like where we grew up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the North End. I wasn't raised in the North End, but I spent a lot of time there, going to church and whatnot. And you could see how everyone came together. But even where I grew up was predominantly a white neighborhood, working class, blue collar. There was of course there was racism and stuff like that, just because people were just ignorant and just didn't understand. But it wasn't as overt as it could have been because people understood. I was one of two black families, myself, the Joneses and the Marsmans. We were still considered part of the neighborhood, right? People didn't know us, and our families became well respected. And we were working class people. We were poor, but we were together, and there was positive things from that.
Yeah, true. So even Halifax, like when you think about, we never really called them, they weren't really called ghettos, but you had like Mulgrave Park and Uniacke Square, and again, like those two neighborhoods came about largely because of what happened earlier in the 60s and early 70s with Africville,
Yeah, yeah.
right? With the forced relocation of the residents of Africville, they either went to Uniacke Square or Mulgrave Park,
Yeah.
into government housing,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? To create those neighborhoods and those communities. In the post-war years, ghettos didn't disappear. Instead, they evolved. Across the United States, Europe, and beyond, new forms of segregation emerged. This time driven by racial, economic, and social policies rather than wartime occupation. In the US, the Great Migration saw millions of Black Americans move from the rural South to northern cities in search of opportunity. But instead of finding equal footing, they were met with discriminatory housing policies, redlining, and economic barriers that confined them to overcrowded, underfunded urban neighborhoods. Banks refused to lend to black homebuyers. Real estate agents steered families away from white areas, and industries often excluded black workers from stable, well-paying jobs. The result? Entire communities were locked into cycles of poverty, with fewer resources, failing schools, and limited access to healthcare. A similar pattern unfolded in Europe. In cities like Paris and London, waves of immigrants from former colonies arrived, hoping for a better life. Instead, they were often forced into neglected housing projects on the outskirts of cities, with little government investment or economic mobility. Over time, these areas, home to immigrants from North Africa, the Caribbean, and South Asia, became stigmatized as dangerous or undesirable. The idea of the ghetto had transformed from a space of forced confinement to one shaped by systemic inequality. Governments may not have been building walls, but economic and social structures were just as effective at keeping these certain groups trapped in place. As far as negative connotations, all I remember, and I didn't grow up in Uniacke Square, I grew up on the offshoot, which is Creighton Street, and all I remember is positivity. I remember community, I remember church, I remember that aspect of it. Where we a little bit worse off socioeconomically, sort of. There were a couple of families living in one large house, but as far as the other aspects of what you would think is bad with the ghetto, I didn't really see it because I grew up with it, right?
Yeah. We didn't really know it.
Yeah, and when I was old enough to recognize that stuff, it was like, oh, that's so-and-so, he's a drug dealer, and you know what I mean? It was like, it wasn't a huge deal. Or, oh, so-and-so going to high school, oh, so-and-so's father got shot the other day. Oh, it's too bad, man. It's really sad. But, it's stuff that happened.
Yeah. And people were just doing what they had to do, but it was part of our lives that we didn't know, the downside of what it looked like. It was just people trying to survive.
Yeah, exactly.
The one thing that I can say sometimes, even in ghettos, for instance, creativity in a creative way, some good things have come out because of the ghetto aspect. Like in hip hop, there is the song "The Message," which was able to sort of talk and depict what it was like to live in those ghettos and what was going on. And that became a thing where it blew up and people started to talk about these things that were plaguing the system. And it gave people a voice. It gave people some hope, and it gave people something to do, even under the circumstances. So even out of hardships, you can sort of look at your situation, but still glamorize it in a way that can tell the story of everyone's plight so everyone can understand. There was also a guy named Mac Davis who wrote the song "In the Ghetto" for Elvis Presley. Now, Mac Davis was a white man, and when he was five or 6 years old, he had a black friend, and he was so upset that why did his friend have to go to the bad part of town? So years later, when he was writing that, he remembered that story, and sort of "In the Ghetto" tells the story of what it was like in those plights. So, it gave people a voice and an insight to what people were going through, which I found pretty cool.
Yeah. Birthplace of hip hop.
Yeah.
And of course, Black culture in North America, the food, the music, identity, the clothing, all came from these circumstances, right? So, hub of creativity, definitely.
That's how people became ghetto fabulous. You know what I mean?
Breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground.
You have been listening to Down Home. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Breaking new ground. Sip a breaking new ground, breaking new ground, breaking new ground. Yeah. On a high plateau, from the one down below to the future of the funk, getting lost in the flow. Contact with the spark magex. Now it's time to flex with the force from the soul, reaching all aspects, getting deep, no time to sleep. As you reach your next phase, laying it all on the line. New trails start to blaze. It's a fire inside, a brand new path, breaking down the sum to one. Feeling free, I just laugh with the joy.
The song Breaking New Ground from The Breakdown.
Like magic prescribed, only to seal a perfect blend, like a diamond in the rough, ready to drop a perfect gem. It's time to shine so fine to see what you find.